Personalities matter, and they matter so far as they are influential in a positive way with regards to the future of international and global political affairs, especially for the negotiation and the entrance of that specific country into the European Union. Today I have the distinct pleasure to have with us Ambassador Vygaudas Usackas, who has been an ambassador, among others, in the United States and the UK, but also EU ambassador in Afghanistan and Russia during turbulent times. Ambassador Usackas has been also a chief negotiator of Lithuania's entrance into the European Union. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos, and I'm the CEO of Strategy International, and this is Prime Analysis. Ambassador, welcome to our show.
Pleasure to be with you, Marius.
I would like to go straight into the point, if I may. You have an excellent CV, an experience beyond international and European affairs. It's more global, if I may say. And I would like to start, if you want, with a simple question. How did you end up in the world of political affairs? How did you make your choice?
Well, I think circumstances sometimes matter too, as personalities matter. And for me, it was a coincidence when I was finishing Vilnius University, my alma mater, which is oldest in the Baltic region, soon to be 500 years. It was in 1990 that coincided with, the changes taking place at that time in the former Soviet Union, and Lithuania was aspiring for independence. We were kind of locomotive, driving force among all Soviet republics. And since 1988, when the independent movement was launched in Lithuania, I was a part of that independent movement, as most Lithuanians were. But I was also actively participating and being a leader of reconstituted Lithuanian Student Union. I was taking part in different debates, in demonstrations, in gatherings, raising the issue for independence. So that was my natural participation in democratic movement. When independence was proclaimed in 1990, I graduated from Vilnius University, and I was offered already at that time to join the Foreign Minister of Lithuania. However, I had already pledged myself to continue my doctorate thesis in the history of law and state, and in philosophy of history of law and state. And I had a scholarship first in Norway and then in Denmark. So I said I want to continue, but then I've got a second call, and the third call came from the Minister of Foreign Affairs himself, the first Foreign Minister of Lithuanian independence in 1990, Mr. Saudargas, who said, well, look, it's a third and the last call. Think about it. And he offered me to, after fast crash training, to go to Brussels and to open the Lithuanian representation to the European Union, at that time European Economic Community, EEC, and NATO. So I was puzzled about that offer, and I was still, kind of doubting. And then my friends, Danish professors, have convinced me, saying, well, look, Vygaudas, instead of writing about history of ideas and state, you have a chance, an invitation from your government to help to build your country literally from scratch, because during the Soviet times, when Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union, we did not have independent diplomatic service. Lithuania did not have a foreign ministry as such. So it was, it was an opportunity, lifetime opportunity. So I accepted that offer, and I never regretted.
It's very interesting because it seems that this personality, leading personality, then probably with regard to the EEC and NATO, has been shaped throughout a process which the younger generation nowadays reads it mostly in history. And I'm pretty sure that that has shaped very clearly in your mind the way that Lithuania's posture should be with regards to the European Union. So I would like to spend a bit of time to discuss with you, if you may, a few things with regards to how your experiences also shaped this leading personality that was emerging more, because we will go further in the discussion to discuss even more higher positions that had more decision making to be dealt with. But the European Union, was the European Union very clear with regards to Lithuania? Because we know that Lithuania was very clear to the European Union, because the European community at that time was also in a state of change. So how did these things, these challenges merge together, became an opportunity?
Well, first of all, in any life, in any political, business, or diplomatic career, mentors matter.
Of course.
And my mentor was, if not, literally, but in terms of philosophy and thinking, was Thomas Jefferson, right. One of the founding fathers of United States and author of Act of Independence. So my thesis at university, which I wrote and defended for my master's degree, was legal aspects of the political philosophy of Thomas Jefferson. So it coincided, the theory with the practice in Lithuania.
Absolutely.
And that was a driving force of my own thinking, which stemmed from the political philosophy of Adam Smith's invisible hand when it comes to liberal economy, John Locke, and all the American democracy and all the check and balances system, etc. Having said this, my professors at Oslo University and at Aarhus University were both American and European. And some of them were studying European Union, and they already encouraged me to deep dive into the sources of European community. And then another mentor for me, which was very important, who passed away just a year ago, was a long served Foreign Minister of Denmark, Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, my dear friend. His two kids now grown up, leaders of Liberal Party, appropriate ministers. And Uffe was a dear friend since 1990. And he was accompanying me and visiting when I was during negotiations, back in the US, etc. So that's those. I think mentors matter. Whom do you
of course.
deal with? But then it's also about timing. I think the timing was, while initially I was both puzzled, humble, but also a little bit doubtful whether to take that job. But after my conversation with the Foreign Minister, Vygaudas Usackas, and then I served as deputy minister for him in 10 years after I joined Foreign Ministry, I was very impressed and moved that back in 1990, just after, still the Soviet troops were on the ground in Lithuania, and the first priority for the country was to negotiate the border agreements with our neighbors, even with Latvia, our brothers, or Poland, but also with Russia over Kaliningrad and Belarus. And then to negotiate very complex and difficult negotiations with Moscow about withdrawal of Russian troops from Lithuania, which we managed to do faster and earlier than the Russian troops withdrew from Germany, unified Germany.
It's very interesting to say.
But at the same time, he had already that long-term vision that, our place is in Europe. So Vygaudas, he asked me, could you deep dive into what is European community, what is Western European Union, which is not anymore in existence, and what is NATO? So I was the first desk officer. I had a desk and I had a task.
And what do you do? What do you do on day one?
What I do? I remember the day one was when the Foreign Minister of Belgium was arriving to Vilnius to sign recognition of independence of Lithuania,
Right.
and I have to rush to the airport to receive him. So there were, very interesting moments. But so I started, literally from the scratch, from tabula rasa for Lithuania.
Exactly.
Preparing, the background papers for a minister, prime minister, for the president, accompanying them in the meetings, visiting Brussels, entering, NATO for the first time, or European Union, and then, moving to, when I moved in February, 1st of February 1992 to Brussels, where I served for 4 years. So I was the first, counselor for the EU, and then the first liaison officer with NATO, where I worked a lot with Americans, with Greeks and Europeans, to establish Lithuania as a candidate for NATO, and then at the end of the day, we became both members of the EU and NATO 19 years ago.
And it's a very big success of 19
It
years.
was great experience. It was a experience of multilateral diplomacy. It was experience of dealing with multinational, institutions and the teams. And it was especially first 4 years, 91, 96, 5 years, it was about opening the door, presenting yourself. And, people were all, who's this Lithuania? Who was the Baltics? Some of them knew, some of them did not. Some of them were forthcoming, some of them were, a little bit cold, but it was about warming up and pushing your case. Initially it was about how to get humanitarian assistance in 92, 93. And then we moved to, to the negotiations over association agreement, and then, in NATO, Partnership for Peace, etc. And, that was, Brussels was a great spot to be in terms of expanding networks, understanding how Brussels works, and then meeting, different countries with whom we then conducted negotiations with Cyprus together.
And I presume Cyprus years later.
We started the same. We started with Cyprus.
We started at the same time, yeah.
And we ended at the same time.
Really? I was not. Maybe I was making a mistake, but I thought it was Lithuania 1 year early. I think it was 2002.
No. It was Estonia. It was Estonia, Poland, and Czech Republic, and a few others.
Exactly.
We invited, in Hungary. We invited. We were with the second tranche, but we finished at the same time, all of us.
Exactly.
And while chief negotiator in 2001. I was pushing very hard
to go as a group of countries together.
Exactly.
Because it made sense.
Exactly. And it was, Malta, Cyprus, Lithuania,
security is I'm sorry, I'm just stopping here, but I remember back in the days, there was a discussion that security is interlinked and development is interlinked to those countries. Was this statement correct?
Absolutely so. Especially, of course, Cyprus has, one history of its own integration with EU and negotiations where geopolitical factors, especially factor of Turkey, mattered. For us was Russia, was an external factor which served as impediment. And I remember, when we started in 1992, when we started only our journey to the European Union and NATO, I was clearly told by both on NATO side Americans and then the European side, on EU side Europeans, the Russian factor will be the only external factor which will influence. Latvia and Estonia were influenced due to the big Russian minority in Estonia, Latvia. At that time, in Latvia was like almost 50%, in Estonia 35%. We did not have such a sizable Russian population. It was only like 12%. But for Lithuania was another geopolitical factor which mattered, was Kaliningrad, former Königsberg, or as we call in Lithuania, Karaliaučius. And that is also our native lands, we call, because Lithuanian language started literally in Karaliaučius, in Königsberg area. So very early, I led an effort from Lithuanian side. How to outreach both Russia and Kaliningrad in particular, so as to mitigate possible threats.
Right.
And we managed so successfully, I must be proud, and on time, because if you look to the ongoing war in Ukraine, I don't think we would have been allowed to do that. But back in '96, when I returned from Brussels to Vilnius, I returned back with this, very pure understanding that, of course, everything depends on us, on our homework, on our economy, on our democratic institutions, but also it will depend how we're going to mitigate a potential, risk and potential threat from Russia, which could impede our accession to both European Union and NATO. So we started an outreach, very,
early on,
very early on. I remember 1998 when the Russian ruble collapsed. The emergency situation was proclaimed in Kaliningrad by the governor of Kaliningrad, and on that time I was driving for another. I was also chairman of the Commission of Bilateral, cooperation with Kaliningrad, and I was traveling to Kaliningrad, and then I called to the Prime Minister at that time of Lithuania and said, "Look, we have." Because I'm going, and the TV and the governor, and I used to see the commander of the Baltic Fleet, the biggest fleet in the Baltics of Russia, Admiral Yegorov, and with governor, I said, well, we should, since it coincided, we should announce that we're going to provide humanitarian assistance. And at that time, we announced as Lithuania giving 2,000 liters, probably about 750,000 euros humanitarian assistance, and invited neighboring countries, Sweden, Poland, and others. So it really, when I think now, we promoted sub-regional cooperation between, the local counties of Kaliningrad district and Lithuania, including Sweden, Poland, and others. So we were successful in that soft diplomacy, whatever you may call it, cultural dimension as well, and economic cooperation. Many Lithuanians have started to invest in Kaliningrad, so that by the time that we were advancing negotiations with European Union and NATO, back in 2000, I remember, before I left for the United States, the commander of the Baltic Fleet, Admiral Yegorov, publicly said that he does not see the threat for Russia that Lithuania joins NATO, because relationships
were good,
have established and have been promoted so well. Across all the dimensions of economic political life, that it didn't seem to be a problem neither for Kaliningrad nor for Moscow, and that helped us to successfully accede into the European Union and NATO. Although we had to negotiate special, visa arrangement for Russian citizens living in Kaliningrad, so as they could pass Lithuanian territory.
This is so interesting and so intriguing to see, because you were exactly at the point of history when it actually mattered, and you had to bring a lot of balances, both west, north, east, and south.
Absolutely, and again, one has to admit that those were not an easy times, because
even for any bilateral relation, not only with Russia.
Especially with Russia, and especially for Lithuania, Russia, because still at that time, especially now with the war, it's different. But even at that time, and the relationship between Russia and Lithuania were pretty constructive and positive. Many people in Lithuania still harbored doubts because
about the future changing.
50 years of lost independence.
Yes.
300,000, more than 10% of Lithuanians were deported to Siberia. My grandpa, my father, they spent more than 5 years in Siberia just because they were farmers, they were landlords. Right. And because people worked for them, they lost their property and they were sent to Krasnoyarsk, Siberia. So, having said this, and that, if I'm speaking about mentors, it was also my grandparents who after losing property, after being, my grandpa was in prison for 5 years. My grandma with my father and his sister, they spent 5 years in the forest, cutting the trees and just surviving. But my grandma and grandpa would always say to me, and I repeat it again to my kids, to younger diplomats of Lithuania and EU, never mix the government with the people, because it was Russian people, the same like us, who helped to save them in Siberia when they were deported as a landlords. But they have, provided the hostage, provided the facilities to live in a small houses before they built their own, small house. And my grandpa and grandma were very, very clear on the views when it comes to communists and the Soviet Union in a very severe way, but would always be respectful towards ordinary Russian people.
It's very interesting. I guess that you have a lot of saying into this, and we'll come back to the modern issues, if you want, between Russia and Ukraine, because I presume that there's no better person to understand the mentality of how Russia thinks vis-a-vis the invasion on Ukraine. But I'll come back to this. I want to go back to the personality, experience, entrance to the EC, entrance to NATO, and then ambassador in the US, and then later UK, or vice versa?
First was US. I was appointed as a chief negotiator of the EU for our accession to the EU in 2000, January 2000, and 99, end of 99. And then when we advanced negotiations sufficiently, the ambassador passed away in Washington, and my president turned to me and said, "Vygaudas, negotiations are going smoothly. We need to have you, and we buy you one-way ticket to Washington to get Lithuania into NATO." So it was 2001, February 2001.
Difficult years soon after for the U.S.
First of all, George W. Bush. I went to see him, presented my credentials with the first row of 5 or 6 ambassadors. And I remember the Qatari ambassador was in front, before me, coming with 6 children and with wife. And then I came by myself, because it was, middle of school. Kids were studying, and he looked at me puzzled and said, "Why are you alone?" I said, "Mr. President, I came for the hard work. So what's your mission statement?" John, I said, "To get Lithuania into NATO." And then he turns to Condi, "What's the problem?" So that was conversation with him. I said, Russians is a problem. So what? Sit down, tell me. So it went out of the official script. I know that afterwards, the State Department have shared the report of my meeting as an example for other U.S. ambassadors how to engage with head of state. So we got into this kind of very, 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 easy relationship with George W. and then with Laura when my wife arrived. And I explained to President Bush, all the complexities. It coincided that at the same day, President Adamkus was in Moscow meeting Vladimir Putin, talking about the same issues of NATO and the EU. So, and then, 9/11 happened. I still remember very well, 9/11, we were having a breakfast with the American Jewish Committee at Willard Hotel, which is in front of the White House. And, President Adamkus, myself, and the row of rabbis and others. And then, there was a question which I was asked by President, and Secret Service come to me, U.S. Secret Service comes to me and say, "Mr. Ambassador, we have a problem." Never in my life someone would have interrupted my conversation with the President and with the guest of honor. Said, "We have problem and we have to evacuate now." So I turned to President and to Jewish Committee representative, said, "Well, Secret Service has a message to say." And they said, "Well, look, the news came out that,
this and this happened.
In New York, one plane
yes.
hit, the World Trade Center, and the second one, and 2 more planes in the vicinity." So what we did, and
it was conflicting information even
No.
at that moment.
Yes, it was conflicting.
What is happening? And that was before also the incident also with the
Pentagon.
With the Pentagon.
Yeah, it was before.
Everything
was going at the same time.
At the same time.
But the funniest was that we went to the rooftop where First Lady of Lithuania was waiting for the President, and she was, puzzled and watching TV how the second hit into the World Trade Center. And then only after that time, after some time, Secret Service came to the conclusion maybe it's not the most safest place to be
in
on the top floor in front of the White House. So we went down to the kitchen, and everything has changed. And then we were supposed to see President Bush at 4 p.m. on 9/11, and all happened at 8 o'clock in the morning or 8:50. And my friend, who was at that time, director of operations at the White House, later he became Deputy Secretary of State, Steve Biegun, was in charge of, taking care of not only Air Force One and President George W., but also in terms of providing support to two heads of state. At that time was Australian Prime Minister Howard was in town, and my president was in town. So next day we were offered one of the Air Force Ones to fly out of US to Reykjavik, and from Reykjavik he flew back to Vilnius. So that's how things have changed, and then of course Iraq War, Afghanistan War was later. But in the nutshell, we managed to gather a so-called Vilnius 10 group, and we were lobbying hard, Central Europeans.
Yeah, because from that moment it was clear cut. Entrance of
it was not clear cut. No, it was not clear cut. It was on the contrary. It was a concern that with America preoccupied on the war against terrorism, they would not. But we managed to connect that allies matter, and in 2004 we joined NATO. I've got as a present, I visited all U.S. states except most exotic one, Alaska and Hawaii. So I met each and every senator, including two from Hawaii and two from Alaska, and entertaining so many guests of honor, etc. So when the moment came to the vote, each country was voted individually. So Lithuania received 86 yeah and 0 nay, and no abstention. So I've got this roll vote, which is now placed at the embassy in Washington, which was the biggest achievement. And then, of course, hosting President George W. and Laura in Vilnius for 2 days and entertaining them together with my president and my wife was a great honor.
Great success. And then UK comes along.
And then, frankly, because we had such a close relationship I had with my president, and after 5 years and a half, almost 6 years, he wanted me to stay for another 4 years. I said, I love the United States, but as a professional diplomat, I don't want to lose the sight, because I started to be concerned that after 5-6 years in the same post, you may lose sight of objectivity. You're starting,
to become more sentimental.
And you cannot. With all due respect, I love the United States. Our kids love the United States. My daughter lives in the States, and grandson was born in the United States. The second one is coming.
Congratulations.
And so many friends. But I, as a Lithuanian, with all due respect, not necessarily all the times our agendas will overlap, and you have to retain that distance. So I asked him, I love America, but I like to move. For him, it was a surprise. He himself is American Lithuanian. He's still alive. He's 94 years old and carrying on. And he made a big career as a head of environmental agency for Midwest. And he returned himself in 97 and ran for the president. So in the nutshell, for him, it was a surprise that someone says, thank you, I would like to leave from Washington, which is considered number one post. And then, he said, London, UK, especially because we were campaigning for Queen Elizabeth II to pay a state visit to Lithuania. And at the same time, with the EU accession, we had like 200,000 Lithuanians, a lot of small but big problems individually. So I tried to gather them, also to build economic links between UK and Lithuania, and then to help and to host for the state visit the Queen Elizabeth II was a great, experience as well. Alongside with many, many links we have established and advanced with UK. And then another call came back in 2010 when the new government asked me to join as a foreign minister, which was hard to refuse as well.
Because I think it's the peak of the personality and the experience of that personality.
Well,
it is not only the successes, but it's also the experience that matters at that level. Because most importantly, in 2023, 2024, what matters is also leadership. So leadership comes along from a period of time where a personality experiences all the benefits and all the doubts and all the challenges and all the opportunities, because up until now your life story, your experiences is everything as it should be. So foreign minister, how's the experience into politics?
Well, the most difficult part was politics back at home.
Yes, of course.
With your own members
of
own members of the political party, because it was always, someone who is, either jealous or is not happy with what you do.
Tell us with which political party for the audiences that may not.
No, I was a member of the Conservative Party of Lithuania. I was a member before I left politics and joined business. But the Conservative Party, EPP,
yes, EPP,
in terms of EPP European family. Again, it coincided. We started with one agenda, and then in 2008, financial crisis came.
Of course.
So, and that's where I have to adjust our program, and I pushed forward. I said, look, in terms of crisis, each minister has to, Minister of Finance is going through the cuts. Minister of Economy is looking at how to trade, maintain relations with neighbors and with markets. And me as a foreign minister, I was Minister of Trade, External Trade as well. So I said, well, we as a foreign ministry, we have to look to the ways how can we contribute to and open new markets, and that was, economic diplomacy came into the play as a first priority alongside of security policy, of course, and that's why we had, I led missions, opening embassy in India, in Emirates, in bringing and opening, Chamber of Commerce, and I was leading delegations together with Minister of Economy. We founded at that time on the basis of Ireland, because being in the United States, I saw how proactively and aggressively Invest Ireland was acting in the United States and attracting U.S. investment. So we copied Invest Ireland, and we opened that in Lithuania, Invest Lithuania, which was under auspices of both Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Economy. So we worked very closely with Minister of Economy, organized joint missions, trade missions to new markets, and I think that paid off. But it also coincided with 2008 war in Georgia already by Russia, and then with the change of the president, in 2010 I left the job, and I was asked to be the first EU ambassador in post-Lisbon framework.
Into Russia?
No, to Afghanistan. That was 2010 to
2010?
To February 2010 to September 2013, so 3 years and a half. Yeah. And
still difficult years.
It was a very difficult years. It was a peak, of course, at that time. At that time, EU was working on so-called action plan for Afghanistan.
Yes.
So
it was the policing mission, right?
It was also police training mission, and Baroness Ashton, at that time, first High Representative, said, "We need the action man for the action plan." So I became that action man, and to represent.
So you were staying in Kabul.
I was staying in Kabul. Yeah, I was staying. It was non-family post. Well, it was not really green zone. Well, it's not like in Baghdad, one place. It's more scattered in Kabul. But we were next to the Minister of Interior, which was good and bad, because Minister of Interior was the most popular target for Taliban to attack. So we had different experience, But it was an absolutely new experience for me. I traveled. I was in Afghanistan before as a foreign minister, flying to visiting the Lithuanian troops.
See it,
but then to be stationed, and lead multinational organization. We had the biggest budget in the world of the EU. I myself was in charge for 300 million euros for development aid to Afghanistan, and then operational budget was about 25 million, 180 staff members, and 90 Europeans and 90 Afghans, and of different places. And then Iranians and Pakistanis. So it was to represent 28, negotiate on behalf of 28, and to negotiate among 28. Of course, the latter was the most difficult one. But we had, I really had a great experience, working as Trinity, 3 special representatives of UN, NATO, and European Union, and we would divide our role. Who is leading which part? Which file? We were leading police training for Afghans, public administration reform, higher education, so traveling to universities, opening schools, the hospitals too. And then at some stage, I was very close also with late Richard Holbrooke, who, surprisingly, never had a mandate, never received a mandate from the White House at that time to talk to Taliban. So Americans were not allowed to talk to Taliban at the ambassador's level until Donald Trump, when he instructed
to negotiate.
Zal, a very talented diplomat, Zal Khalilzad, to negotiate with Taliban. And that's a link I'll make at a later stage on the Ukraine-Russia war. But it happened so that about in 2011 or 12, in the middle of my term in Kabul, I started to receive messages, so different ways, from Taliban representatives who wanted to talk to me. And EU leadership was very careful not to, engage into something which was perceived to be,
something, but it was not agreement. There was no protocol.
It was, but also it was something that we were not. It
was difficult.
Making the shots. It was Americans.
Yes.
It was American operation. 120,000 troops, etc., and an overwhelming presence. But American diplomats, my colleagues, they did not have a mandate from the leadership of the United States to talk to Taliban.
So it seems that the Taliban wanted to do any kind of discussion. Probably if the Americans would not speak, the EU would speak, and the EU would...
Well, exactly. So
but there was no mandate as such.
Exactly. And then because I was a special representative of the EU, and it was a kind of gray zone but also an opportunity that I could do some things which not necessarily required an official approval by all 28 member states. So I could do some stuff in an innovative way.
Can I a bit positively challenge a bit this discussion? But how do you feel about what has happened since the withdrawal of the U.S. forces and the Taliban taking over the leadership of Afghanistan and all the atrocities that took place in between the Americans and the Afghani government, overthrowing the Afghani government and putting the Taliban government? How do you feel about it?
Well, few things. First, of course, personally, I was extremely disappointed and angry, and I publicly stated my disapproval as a shame of that decision because I remember when I was back in Afghanistan, together with American generals and ambassadors, we would always pledge our allegiance shoulder to shoulder. We'll stay together as long as it takes. In a similar way, as we say now to Ukrainians, and I hope we drew the lessons. Americans draw the lessons from Afghanistan experience, which are of course very very different from Ukraine. But what we did with our commitment to support Afghanistan, support women and girls. And what is happening now, it's just a shame. I don't dismiss my words and my feelings, and I said that clearly to American friends and to American diplomats and politicians, and as I also remain engaged with Afghans and trying to help them. And that's again one of the lessons is about when to negotiate.
Right.
I mean,
And in that, personality again matters.
it,
And it matters because you have now completed the cycle where you are a decision maker, you're in a most important position, EU position. It's not one entity.
exactly.
I mean, we also have the tendency to forget that the EU has multiple voices. You have to balance this. You have to balance the United States. And you're sitting in a constantly moving sand.
Exactly, and and that's when I was appointed as an EU ambassador, special representative to Afghanistan. As a former foreign minister, I told to my colleagues at that time, Steinmeier, current president of Germany, and David Miliband, and Carl Bildt, and Sikorsky, others. I told them that if you appoint me, don't expect me to be yet another ambassador, because Afghanistan matters so much for the peace of the world and credibility of European Union that I'll be out of box ambassador. And I was very pleased that I had Kat Ashton as a high representative, yes, who was very supportive of me, and I could innovate some things and do something out of the script as I started meeting Taliban representatives. Leadership of political committee of Taliban I met in Doha, I met in Dubai.
You were in the talks in 2016 onwards, the official ones?
No. I was working in support of official negotiations. Mm-hmm. But my first talks took place in 2012. And but it was clear, and the message from the Taliban representatives, senior representatives whom I met twice, was, okay, I need to talk to this boss, and the boss is Americans. But Americans at that time were not ready to talk, and that's why I bring back the issue. When in real estate, and Cypriots are very good in real estate. We'll come to this. We have 10 minutes to go for that. It's all about location, like Lepta says.
Absolutely.
In diplomacy, in a peace and war, in negotiations, it's all about timing. And what we've seen, tragically, that Americans were not in a position, they believed, and not only Americans, Europeans, many of Europeans believed, which I disapproved at that time, you can win war by military. No, you can't win by military. And at some stage, peace talks will come. And the question is not about who will blink first, as we say in diplomacy, but is when do you start negotiations? And the conclusion from Afghanistan experience of mine is you start negotiations when you have an upper hand. In 2011, 2012,
there was an upper hand.
US and the West had an upper hand, and Taliban was sending messages,
come and talk to us.
But there was arrogance.
Very interesting.
There was complacency.
It is very interesting coming from your
and then that's why when Trump made the decision, it was clear Taliban knew that Americans are leaving. And then they say, well, you have the watch, I have the time.
Exactly. So they probably also knew that the financial situation would change.
Exactly. And so they had to equip themselves with patience, and then, we saw the tragic consequences.
But, I don't want to stay in the Afghani thing, but there were also external rules and regulations that actually changed with regards to the support they were getting once they had decided they would go on their own. We saw with the withdrawal of the U.S. forces, immediately soon after, several countries came to the rescue to support them. Eventually, this is not easy because Afghanistan is a big country, has a lot of requirements, economies has fallen away, health, women, it has gone all the 20 years back in the steps. But this is another story. I would like to move, if you want, to Russia. And I would like to connect this with the Russia-Ukraine.
Yeah.
Your experience with Russia. Following Afghanistan, you are EU ambassador into Russia, into Moscow, in another very interesting period of time. When was it, and what were the challenges?
I was appointed on 1st of September 2013. Strangely enough, and I've served until November 2017.
And you have Crimea in the between.
It happened, Crimea. No. First of all,
you have a lot of things in between, but
when I arrived in September, official mission of EU policy with Russia, we were strategic partners, and we were building a common space, economic, cultural,
Eurasian
political space
Yes.
from Lisbon to Vladivostok.
Exactly.
But already in September and October, the black clouds started to gather. Before association agreement was supposed to signed in Vilnius, which was refused, and then you got,
Yes.
Crimea, etc. And of course, at that time was, again, it was coincidence that a Lithuanian who is from former Soviet Union, but also very strong Western commitments and values. That I had to be a voice and the face of European Union in Russia when it comes to responses to the illegal annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass, explaining about the sanctions, explaining about our policies, but trying to keep the bridges with academia, with the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, with the civic society, and with the businesses at that time.
Of course.
Still, now we have sanctions, etc., on the business, which was not the case in 2014, 2015, and that was very, very sensitive and challenging job because in the EU you have, Cyprus and Greece have one kind of cultural experience and political experience, historical experience with Russia, and then you have the Baltics and then Poland, another experience.
Very different and diverse, and at the same time converging
and
within the EU values.
As we've seen, an amazingly converging and unifying effort. While initially, of course, everyone was shocked what happened in Crimea and Donbass, and the first sanction decisions were not easy made within the EU. But I think President Putin did not help. President Putin have helped a lot the European Union to stay united, because it was clear that what he's doing is illegal. It is unprovoked war, and it damages and destroys the international rule system upon which European
Checks
Union and all of us have been developing. So it's very disappointing to see where we ended in relations between West and Russia, and history will tell why and how, but the bottom line is clear that European security architecture is built on the free choices of countries whom they want to associate, and Ukraine had made a choice to become member of European Union and member of NATO, and Russia unfortunately tried Russia used illegal means and crimes, to launch the war against independent state, and that's where we are. And then how to recover from that will be very difficult. It will be a prolonged war, I hope, of less intensity than it is now. And at the end of the day, we see Ukraine. Ukraine surprised everyone. No one believed they're going to withstand the force of Russia in February 2022. And they maintained. They retained Kiev. They rebuffed Kiev. They have retaken Kharkiv and one third territory which was initially occupied. And we see now Ukrainian army is probably the strongest, most experienced army and well equipped in Europe, and it will bring a contribution to European security in coming months. And I personally believe, as long as Ukraine's aspirations are not satisfied with membership in the EU and NATO, Putin, whoever is in Kremlin, will try to use that uncertainty and meddle.
It's not going to be reconstruction is what I also care, because the EU integration and fast-paced integration within the EU has also some challenges ahead, because
absolutely
in the field of the reconstruction, you can understand that a lot of people have been dislocated. There's a lot of damage has been done. Basic infrastructure is needed, taxational system is needed. The government will continue the accession talks with the EU and at NATO. I believe that now the military has more capabilities and more capacities assigned to be, the readiness force that is required in the military aspect of NATO than the EU, because the EU is it comprises of a lot of things, not only the political elements, but also to bring about a near future to the Ukrainians. So, last question, so we can close in 2 minutes. Experience of Cyprus. I know that you're spending a bit of time here in your lifetime. Another very important area strategically, geostrategically, with a frozen conflict, with an emerging good collaboration with surrounding areas. We know that we have good relations with countries such as yours in Lithuania. Where do we stand? How do you see it?
Well, first of all, we enjoy with my wife living in Cyprus. It's our second home and second country. And, Cyprus is a very hospitable country. It's very diverse. It's like California. You have mountains and you have sea. You can do at the same time with swimming and skiing. And you have beautiful vineyards and great seafood and nice landscape. We are from countryside, so we like countryside. Right. Then, when it comes to business and politics, I think Cyprus is in the midst of Mediterranean, and you have resources, you have natural resources in the sea, and you have, diverse neighborhood, which you have to deal and address. Yeah. And I think again, your special relationship, your membership in the EU is a basic platform from which you project your interest and address it. Your special relationship, if I may say so, with the United Kingdom, which is also which has a military component in the island itself. Sometimes a joke that you have a hidden Article 5 guarantees of NATO, which no one is speaking about, but you have British troops on the ground, and no one would dare, to use a force against Cyprus, from my personal conviction.
In the relations of the frozen conflict, you also have Greek troops, and you also have Turkish troops as well, but it's in the occupied lands.
And I know that the new president is reinvigorating his efforts in trying to engage European Union. From my point of view, absolutely correct. EU, I think EU should designate special representative for Cyprus issues and gather the cloud and influence over another side and with Turkey, and I still hope that one day Cyprus will be united and will be under one flag and in the family of the EU. But at the same time, economic in terms of economy, you have great opportunities not only as a tourist country but also as diversified economy, and you see what our neighbors and from Belarus, Wargaming have done in terms of booming IT sector here and others. So I enjoy being here and look forward to contribute to the Cyprus economy and well-being.
Ambassador, thank you very much for being with us today at Prime Analysis. I really enjoyed our discussion. It was a very lively discussion, and I really hope to have you again soon to discuss even more topics, more specific and even more to the point, considering that great personalities as yourselves have actually shaped Euro-Atlantic, not only European policies and decisions, things that we as Europeans now are on call to make sure that we ensure these values, that they are progressed together. So thank you very much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Aristo.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for watching Strategy International's Prime Analysis. Please subscribe, like, and follow, and also register with our YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos, and I'm the CEO of Strategy International, and this was Prime Analysis. And remember, impact makes a difference.